Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Nnia Nwodo. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, as a judicial panel set up to investigate police abuses prepares to begin sitting this week in Nigeria's biggest city, Lagos, prompted by street protests demanding police reform and calls for officers suspected of abuses to be held accountable, Nigerians are continuing to assess the effects of those End Sars demonstrations, which to some extent have been superseded by concerns over a weekend of looting, arson and the deployment of security forces. So, is the country now in the aftermath of the crisis? If so, how does it move forward in the face of deep inequalities, mismanagement, corruption, ethnic tensions and bad governance? We'll speak to the economist, lawyer, former two-time minister, former presidential aspirant and current president of the pan-cultural organization Ohanaeze Ndigbo, John Nnia Nwodo. Coming up. Now, it is not entirely unreasonable to suggest that for the past couple of weeks, Nigeria has been at war with itself. Peaceful protests turning violent and destructive after gunmen fired at protesters in the commercial hub of Lagos. But many people, particularly business owners and politicians, are quite frankly breathing a big sigh of relief that the worst of the looting, the arson and the destruction appear to be over. But a peace deal is yet to be agreed, and that satisfactory peace looks like it could be a long time coming, even though the protesters appear now to be off the streets and the curfews are being gradually eased. So what happens to that fragile peace? Well, the first of a number of judicial panels set up to investigate police abuses begins its work in Lagos this week. It's one of the consequences of those protests by young Nigerians calling for police reforms and meets one of their key demands.
This is the panel that will be responsible for conducting investigation, they'll take in reports from people that are victims of all these cases of police brutality. After they take in the reports, then they prescribe as appropriate for the Attorney General to prosecute. Now, I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, but it's very important, very, very important that the youth are well represented on this panel. Why? Because we have to monitor proceedings. Nobody in Nigeria of today can sit back and allow any panel carry on their work without any sort of supervisory role. We have to supervise what's going on there, because we know this is Nigeria. We know all the nonsense. I'm telling you, let us be watching everything that's going on. Let us be sure that there's transparency. Let us be sure that everybody is accountable for their actions. And we're speaking about this Akuzu Sars, the same guy that's notorious for all these heinous crimes was made senior security officer or something by governor of Anambra State. Obiano. If after investigation we find out that he committed some of these crimes while he was a senior security officer or whatever that post is, the governor would inevitably have become an accomplice to those offenses. So we have to really dig deep, bring out all the facts, show everything, and make sure that these people are brought to book. It's very important.
The Nigerian musician Falz there. Well, for more on what's been happening in Nigeria for the past 2.5 weeks and what happens next, I'm joined now via WebEx by the economist, lawyer, former two-time minister and president of the pan-cultural organization Ohanaeze Ndigbo, John Nnia Nwodo. Chief Nwodo, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're really very grateful to you for taking the time to talk to us today. And I'm sure you heard Falz there, the young Nigerian musician Folarin Falana, talking about the panel of investigation that begins work in Lagos this week. On the face of it, it seems rather positive. But what are your hopes that a proper investigation will take place given the background to these cases?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I listened to Folarin, I'm a little worried about a few legal issues. On the exclusive legislative lists of the constitution that is in operation now is the police. The federal government is exclusively responsible for police. But I find that judicial panels are being by governors as well as by the federal government. It raises a very jurisprudential issue as to the validity of the panels being set up at the state levels. Now, Folarin has raised a substantial issue. I don't know the composition of this panel, but its composition must be such to engender confidence. If it isn't, I'm afraid it will be futile to go on. I do hope that government has exercised due care in choosing members of this panel. I also think that we very often forget that wisdom is not the exclusive preserve of the youth, of the elderly. I totally agree with him that there are many lawyers, including senior advocates, who are youth. And I think that if it is someone with legal knowledge that has to be on this judicial panel, there must be someone who reflects the age, the thinking, and the aspirations of the Sars movement. It is, however, from point of view wrong if the Sars is an interested party in this judicial inquiry for it to be a member of the inquiry. Then it wouldn't stand the rules of law. It would not be admissible to have an interested party. You will not be a judge in your own court. But once there are people who have no inclination to side police or side government or side the Sars movement, that would be an appropriate judicial inquiry. I think in the next few days, as the names of the members come to light, we will be able to make a more informed critique of the composition.
Without sort of making you jump the gun, if nothing comes of these investigations, what might the consequences be? Because this is not the first time that judicial panels on the reform of the police have been held, is it?
No, it is not. I don't even agree with the holistic approach to these problems. The truth of the matter is that it doesn't require judicial inquiry to ab initio identify those who have transgressed before, because there are records of it. There are people who have been reported to the authorities for abuse of their
Right, it looks like we've temporarily lost John Nwodo there, but we will get back to him as soon as possible. The internet is a little bit dodgy, but there he is. You were speaking just a minute ago. Please continue, Chief Nwodo.
I was saying that before this panel was set up, it would have been possible through an administrative work to find all the pending cases that have not been treated about reports against Sars. Not only will they be available in the Office of the Inspector General of Police, but they will be available in law courts where individuals may have taken out cases against the police and Sars about transgressions in the past. These things should be in the public view. By now, we would have had list of cases. The case of the gentleman who was working in Anambra government house is already public knowledge. By now, we should know what he being accused of, what reports have been made against him before, why was the case proceeded, and what is the issue.
Right. The governor also indicated, the governor of Lagos, didn't he, that the scope of the investigation is going to cover last week, the Tuesday's shooting at the Lekki toll gate. I mean, do you expect more information and perhaps more clarity to emerge about that incident as the panel begins sitting?
Yes, clearly we should have known by now what the Nigerian security services have unearthed about those responsible for removing the cameras at the Lekki toll gates. Some of these were captured by even ordinary people. We should know that film should be public knowledge. It should be given to this committee or judicial committee. And all the gathering of information that is necessary for this should by now be in the public purview. This is not a compromise of the confidentiality of the proceedings, but it is an exercise to engender public confidence about the procedure for this inquiry. If the public is not satisfied that everything is being done openly, honestly, and without any indication to cover up any information, we might return to square one.
Okay, well, we've got a couple of minutes left before we have to take a break. Let me just move this over to the issue that's dominated the pages of newspapers and social media about the looting of government warehouses and private businesses being destroyed, the properties of people being invaded, and whether there was some justification or not. What are your thoughts on that?
Quite honestly, there can never be a justification for looting of public property. But the point is that the incident on Lekki toll gates, the lack of detailed response to the agitations of the Sars movement must have fanned embers of dissatisfaction, and tempers would have risen to an extent that some of the people in the Sars movement would have found it very difficult to control their temper. But I must congratulate them, because it didn't appear as they were the ones who decided to turn to looting of government warehouses and what have you. But it raises a serious question as to why we're in the middle of COVID and the warehouses are full and people are hungry. I mean, is there any information regarding the fact that these relief materials were started? How long have they been in those warehouses? If they've been there for just 1 week or for just a few days, there's no justification for their looting. But I can understand the ordinary Nigerian who feels government has provided something for us and nobody has distributed it to us. And it's all locked up in the warehouse. And if it's been locked up for more than 2 months, it raises eyebrows, substantial eyebrows. But it doesn't justify that we should break into it. It justifies that we should surround the warehouse and insist that government distributes it.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to stay with us, Chief Nwodo, because we're going to take a break, but we'll come straight back to you. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the aftermath of the protests and the unrest in Nigeria. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Nnia Nwodo. Now, as you may have heard, some Nigerians have been defying curfews and appeals from the president himself to ransack government warehouses in several cities. They stole food and agricultural supplies from stores in the cities of Jos, Lagos and Calabar, and more recently in the capital Abuja, as well as in Taraba and Adamawa states. They also ransacked the homes of government officials. Throughout the weekend, security forces struggled to control rampaging youths who've been described as thugs and hoodlums. It all, of course, began with protests against police criminality. Well, now work is getting underway this week to investigate those police abuses, a key demand of the demonstrators. But will it be enough? We'll speak some more to my guest, Chief Nnia Nwodo, in a moment. But first, here's a reminder of the terms of reference of the judicial panel as set out by the Governor of Lagos State, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, about a week ago.
I therefore urge you to approach this task with all sense of responsibility, even as Lagosians look to you for a fair and just outcomes. On our part, we look forward to your recommendations, which we pledge to implement to the best of our ability. We are determined to ensure that the police and other security agencies no longer brutalize or kill our people. I am on the side of the young people out there. I understand your pain, and I know your concerns are genuine and legitimate. I must reiterate that whilst we were able to immediately acquaint to some of your demands, some others will require time. We ask you to bear with us as we dutifully work on your demands. I assure you that Lagos State will neither tolerate the violation of your fundamental human rights nor the victimization of its residents.
Right, and that's the Governor of Lagos State there, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, setting out the terms of reference for the tribunal, investigative tribunal that begins work in Lagos this week. And with me via Cisco WebEx, the economist, lawyer, former two-time minister and president of the pan-cultural organization Ohanaeze Ndigbo, John Nnia Nwodo. And Chief Nwodo, thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Now, Nigeria seems, on the one hand, very united right now in calling for change, but on the other, very divided. I mean, there are ethnic divisions, generational divisions, and the division between rich and poor. What can the country learn right now, even if it's not at war, about resolving the crisis that it faces?
The country should learn to be open in governance with its people. The country should learn to be transparent. The country should learn to be topical in responding to the yearnings and aspirations of the people. Now, let me tell you, I'm very grateful to these youths. They have given an opportunity for all of us to wake up from slumber. A lot of the things they've been saying have been in the public domain in the last 6-7 years or perhaps more. But nobody has cared about it. Look, Charles, watch the quality of debate that goes into the National Assembly. The National Assembly is paid to do oversight functions, all the things that have surfaced in these protests. But nobody does it. You know, the job there is not taken seriously. And these children have woken up our consciousness. And we're very grateful to them. And I must say, until the miscreants took over, their goal was laudable. No, any reasonable Nigeria would cheer them and encourage them for their courage, their sagacity, their patriotism. However, the miscreants have come to dilute the gains of this movement. And I do hope that the judicial inquiry will arrest this while we go on with the real business of addressing the issues that they have raised. The quality of governance has gone down in our country. The economy has plummeted. And quite honestly, you begin to wonder whether we are all asleep, waiting for the doomsday. And I am reminded of my time as a young man by what they have done. When I was a student in the University of Ibadan, that was the time we were struggling to have a return to democracy and to abandon the military rule that had dominated governance in our country. I personally led demonstrations against Gowon's declaration that 1976 was unrealistic. The police tried to stop us in Western Avenue in Lagos, but in our thousands, we overwhelmed them and they ran away. And no sooner than our demonstrations finished, the military by itself organized an internal coup. And Murtala Mohammed overthrew Gowon. And when he came back with a lot of demands that met the aspirations of the young people. Now, I'm not arguing for a regime change. I'm saying this is a novel opportunity for government to say, well, this has come into the open, and have a reaction that faces all the issues. This idea of judicial inquiry is just scratching the thing on the surface. The question is, why has governance failed in Nigeria? To begin with, the structure of government is failed. It cannot work. We answer federal government of Nigeria.
But we run a unitary system in Nigeria in which the federal government expropriates to itself the powers of the federating units. That was not the history of our coming together as a country. That's not the agreement that our forefathers in the various ethnic nationalities of Nigeria entered into to be one country. Every area had sovereignty of its natural resources and donated royalties to the federal government. And the federal government was assigned responsibilities of a common nature, like foreign affairs, like external defense, like immigration and standardization in terms of copyright and what have you, and banking regulations. We've lost all this, and the federal government controls everything, including education, agriculture, infrastructure. I mean, what the hell is this? I think that this provided an opportunity for government to say, look, clearly, this system is failing. We're building huge debts that our grandchildren will not pay. Our total expenditure on servicing of our interest on our debts is about 70% of our current revenue. There is no country that can sustain that for such a long time. And we are borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. Our oil as a source of revenue is receding in the amount of revenue that is giving us. So if it continues to recede, the volume of debt servicing to national revenue would probably hit to 90%. What are we doing to develop the alternative sources of energy? I mean, of revenue, agriculture, digital technology, digital education, infrastructural development, diversification of sources of earning of revenue? Very little. Government is not
I don't mean to interrupt you, Chief Nwodo. You've raised some very, very interesting issues there, and I'd like to return later in the broadcast to the question of restructuring, which I know is something that you've pushed for and is quite dear to your heart. But in the immediate term, in terms of effecting reconciliation in Nigeria, given all that has happened over the last few weeks, is there a lot to be learned from a process of truth and reconciliation, such as we saw, for instance, in South Africa?
I think there is. I think there is an opportunity for government to set up a body where Nigerians can come and empty their hearts. I think it is important for government to take through that body a roll call of the issues that arise for determination for this country to continue to be stable and to continue to be progressive. There is no alternative to it. The extant bodies in the country have failed to rise up to the expectation. The problems are myriad, and you need the public to have an opportunity to pour out their hearts and to bring to public purview a number of things which are hidden in files and which are leading to all kinds of feelings among citizenry.
Okay, we're going to take a break, Chief Nwodo, and we'll come straight back to you. But very interesting points that you raised there. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the aftermath of the protests and the unrest in Nigeria. Stay with us. The Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Nnia Nwodo. Now, let's talk some more about the convoluted complexities of Nigeria today as the country remains bogged down in the aftermath of more than a fortnight of protests and unrest. Throughout the weekend, some Nigerians defied curfews in several cities to ransack government warehouses, with security forces struggling to control the looting, despite a call from Nigeria's police chief, the Inspector General Mohammed Adamu, on Saturday for the immediate deployment of all police resources. Protests against police brutality first engulfed Nigeria 2.5 weeks ago. One of the judicial panels set up to investigate police abuses begins sitting this week in Nigeria's biggest city, Lagos. And my guest today via Cisco WebEx is the economist, lawyer, former two-time minister and president of the pan-cultural organization Ohanaeze Ndigbo, John Nnia Nwodo, who appears to have just at the right moment vanished off my screens, but hopefully it will have him back. It's a rather tremulous internet that sort of comes and goes. But as we said there, Nigeria now in the aftermath of a crisis and attempting to move forward from protests and unrest. And I am reliably informed that Chief Nnia Nwodo is back on with me. Good to see you there, Chief Nwodo. You were talking earlier about the things that need to happen now, the opportunities that these series of incidents and protests present to the Nigerian government. Do you think this is a good time to hold something like a referendum on the future of this country, a good opportunity for the old system to begin to change?
Well, we very often like to repeat ourselves all over again. If I was in a position to advise the president, I would advise him right now to have a select team of leaders from all parts of Nigeria come back and look at the conclusions of the Constitutional Conference that was held under the tenure of President Goodluck Jonathan. Admit new papers and new views from interested groups and make a recommendation to the country as to the way forward. What structure of government would please Nigerians? Look, at no time except during the war, in the history of this country, have we had such ethnic divisions as we have now. You know, speaking as President General of Ohanaeze, I feel sad that my people sometimes have been accused of being responsible for some of the violence in the country. And I think it's totally without foundation. I mean, in every part of this country, if you take away the indigenous groups that live there, the next highest group, or ethnic group that lives in any part of the country are Igbos. And wherever they live, they invest there. Igbos cannot be destroyers of their own investment or investment of others. I watched the destruction at the palace, despicable destruction at the palace of the Oba of Lagos. And all this sound that I had from there didn't show any Rembrandt language. And yet some very mischievous people have tried to ascribe that destruction to Igbos. And it is regrettable. I like to seize this opportunity to make this point. But having said so, the fact that we've degenerated to the point where ethnicism is so important in employment, in admission to universities, in award of contracts, in political appointments, in development of infrastructure all over the country, this is despicable. I mean, this is because the system we operate now does not make adequate room for accountability and a reflection of the feelings of the people. You cannot be a local government chairman in Nigeria unless you are sponsored by the owners of the political party. You cannot be a governor unless you are sponsored by the owners of the party. The ordinary young man in this country doesn't feel that he has an opportunity to run for election and win it. Now, look, I went to university, which was predominantly Yoruba, and I ran for election as president of Students' Union, and I won, and I defeated a Yoruba man. Zik won election into Lagos City Council and became its leader. Mbono Jike became deputy speaker in the House of Assembly in Lagos. Zik almost became premier of Western Nigeria. In Enugu, Umaru Altini from Katsina became mayor of Enugu and was elected by adult suffrage. Where has this national unity gone to? We have raised passions directed at one another and slowing down our course of development. Look at Rwanda, which was a beneficiary of our African Development Fund, Nigerian fund in the African Development Fund. It's probably the most prosperous country in Africa today. Its growth rates is towers above everybody else's. Because we are distracted by ethnicism, we are distracted by lack of transparency and accountability, and the children are crying out. And I am grateful to God that this Sars movement has shocked us into consciousness. The question is the government ready to pluck the hanging fruits from this exercise?
Next question That's the next question I was going to ask you, Chief Nwodo. I mean, because you've made a very interesting point, which I've also heard quite a lot of people make, about the opportunities presented in a positive way by these protests, which have now pretty much stopped. But have they succeeded in making the point that you've been making, the crucial issue of restructuring, even more pertinent than ever today?
Well, one of the things that I find interesting is that hitherto, the opposition against restructuring came largely from the north, except the middle belt part of the north. The south, the entire south and the middle belt has been in favor of restructuring. A lot of my northern friends told me that we were campaigning for restructuring because the main source of our economy was oil, and it was substantially domiciled in the south. And the NNPC, of course, pursued a number of new explorations for oil in the north. But I felt that was all purely myopic. Because, Charles, as you know, oil is a receding source of revenue globally. And many of the major car companies in the world and machine producing companies in the world are already retuning their factories to be able to produce machines that are not dependent on fossil oil anymore. As I speak to you, the demand for electric cars in China, in Europe and America have outstripped the demand for cars based on fossil oil. The newly installed machines in the world globally, more machines that are not dependent on fossil oil have overtaken machines that are dependent on fossil oil. Now, what does this say? It means that in the next 10, 20 years, nobody will be demanding fossil oil in the percentage in which it is demanded today, and our national revenue will fall drastically. So what are we doing to get ready for this? Now, in northern Nigeria, we have the highest agricultural endowment. And all over the world, agriculture is the highest earning capacity now. Look at a small country like Netherlands, with half the cross-sectional area of Niger State, earning $100 billion in export of just dairies and vegetables. And how does it do this? It builds skyscrapers of green farms. And it can farm all year round. And it can simulate temperature and have dry season and wet season in any of these green farms. Look at the large expanse of land in northern Nigeria. We grow one of the highest volume of cattle in the whole of Africa, but we import milk, we import butter. Look at the amount of cassava that we produce in southern Nigeria. How much ethanol do we export? How much of it do we use to make feeds for our livestock? The children are angry that there is no imagination in government. There's no thinking out of the box. There's no planning for the rainy day tomorrow. There is no diversification. There is no growth for, if you like, model farms for young men.
Well, I mean, Chief Nwodo, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, those are very valid points that you raise. But the question is whether restructuring will guarantee the changes that you're talking about, whether, in a nutshell, for example, this protest movement, as you say, has shown that a system really, that Nigeria is more of a system made for the few rather than the many, that guarantees impunity for those, few, which they are absolutely determined to hold on to. But I mean, the fundamental question is not whether Nigeria has problems, because it clearly does. The question is whether restructuring will guarantee equality for many more people, as well as make the institutions in this country more accountable. Those are the key questions, aren't they?
Yes, but it is obvious from the answer that I give you. If Nigeria goes into a restructured federation with smaller units handling the responsibilities of an amorphous federal government, there will be greater efficiency. It worked before in the past. Look, don't forget that in the First Republic, just from the production of palm produce, Eastern Nigeria was able to have the first iron and steel complex in the whole of Black Africa. It was able to build a university comparable to any university in the rest of the world, attracting international professors like Glenn Taggart to be vice chancellor there. We were able to have University of Lagos and University of Ife, and it was Cocoa. Chief Awolowo was able to build the first stadium in Black Africa, the first television station in Black Africa, and to offer free education at all levels. The granite pyramids in northern Nigeria, they catalyzed cotton mills, they catalyzed production of textile, you know, and they grew Ahmadu Bello University. When we went to university, every university had an endowment. If you wanted to read architecture, you went to Ahmadu Bello.
Well, yes, I mean, Chief Nwodo, I understand all of that, but critics have argued that the motivation, the inspiration in those days was different. I mean, this was a country just coming out of independence. There was you didn't have the same divisions that you have today. And there are critics who today say that restructuring has not moved forward because they say that such a move would tear this country up and bring instability at the worst possible time.
On the contrary, there were very fierce divisions then. There were very fierce divisions, but we had statesmen then. Today we have opportunists in government who have no idea and no philosophy. I mean, Dr. Michael Okpara ended without any fortunes. I do not know the fortunes that Ahmadu Bello ended with. These were people who were motivated to develop their place. The concept of leadership in this country and its selection does not make for the man with a mission to end up in government. This is the problem. And two, the government is too far away from the people. In every institution in the world where there is development, development has been micro-instigated, not macro-instigated. The country is too amorphous for the federal government to run. Look, and we have duplicity of all kinds of government departments. Look at the other day, we were entertained to an NDDC saga. NDDC builds roads, it does water development, and we have Ministry of Water Resources, we have Ministry of Works. What kind of nonsense is this? If you had a smaller government in the NNDC area, they would deal with all these things at a micro level, and it will be so transparent, and it will be difficult not to be transparent because the people will be at you. It will be so obvious that the resources meant for them are not being spent judiciously. But it is difficult to mirror Abuja from the 36 corners of this country. It's practically impossible. It has failed and it has failed.
Okay, let me ask you, Chief Nwodo, to please stay with us. We've got another 15 minutes of chat with you and we're looking forward to it. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our discussion about the aftermath of the protests and the unrest in Nigeria. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Onyegulu, and after a week and a half of protests and unrest across Nigeria, the first of a number of judicial panels set up to investigate police abuses begins its work in the commercial hub of Lagos this week. It's one of the consequences of nearly 2 weeks of protests by young Nigerians demanding police reforms, and meets one of their key demands. Their peaceful protest turned violent after gunmen fired at protesters at the Lekki toll gate in Lagos. Eyewitnesses say soldiers shot at protesters, but the army has denied involvement. Latest figures suggest up to 69 people may have been killed during the violence in the last couple of weeks. My guest today via Cisco WebEx is the economist, lawyer, former two-time minister and president of the pan-cultural organization Ohanaeze Ndigbo, John Nnia Nwodo. And Dr. Nwodo, thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And as you continue to push for this country to move forward with a clean slate and learn from what has happened, how do you think all that's happened in the last few weeks will help to define Nigeria's future?
Well, first of all, thanks to the youths. They have made themselves relevant to governance of Nigeria. They've also brought into public recognition
the necessity to factor the feelings of the people into governance and to be accountable. Thirdly, they have put a very serious note of warning. When you think about Libya, you think about Syria, you think about Yemen, you think about Somalia, you think about Liberia, you think about Sierra Leone, you think about Ivory Coast, and you think about Yugoslavia, and how they went through similar situations like this. You see that we may end in a catastrophe if we do not heed the early warning which this situation has given us. Everyone who loves this country must put his head on the table and let's come together and find a way to put this madness to an end. People can no longer bear this. I mean, there's what they call Hooke's law, which describes elastic limit. The human person has a limit to which he can tolerate the kind of things that happen in our country.
Well, I mean, that sort of segues to the next thing I wanted to talk about, because I mean, the president, Muhammadu Buhari, talked quite emphatically about peace and finding a way to maintain peace in this country. What makes a successful, lasting peace following such a circumstance as we've seen in Nigeria in the last few weeks? I mean, how on earth will a satisfactory peace be achieved here, given how messy and complex that things have been?
The next few days and the investigations that will go on will prove the sincerity of the government. I mean, if we find people who move around with cutlasses, trying to hit people on the road and in the full view of police and nobody arrests them. If you find herdsmen who kill and maim people in their farms with nobody arresting and prosecuting them. If you find villages decapitated in Kaduna State without any solution being found about them. If you find Boko Haram overwhelming our military on a continuous basis and disgracing our national integrity, there is a limit to which you can take all this. If you find our children not having look, when I went to school, Charles, my classmate in my primary school was the junior brother of my father's driver. My father was a parliamentarian and a minister in Eastern Nigeria. There was no school for the minister's child and another school for the driver's child. I'm sure today your driver's children cannot go to the same school as your children. They can't afford it. There's a class stratification everywhere. New private universities have overtaken the old public universities, and they are better in standards. People cannot take this anymore.
Well, I mean, so given what you're saying, Chief Nwodo, do you think this country will fall into more conflict and more protests before that great lasting peace is attained, the equal distribution of the peace happens?
You asked me, what do I think is the solution given this scenario? And I was building it up to the fact that the government should seize the moment and arrest a further drift of the situation. At no time is it possible to do this and now. There is a clear national consensus. We all know where the fault lines are. The question is how to fix them. And that's the business of government. Government must be able to bring about together people who are patriotic and who are interested in seeing that this country develops in peace. If we lose the moment now, it will take us a long while. This is a country with great potentialities. I am sure with the correct orientation will be the pride of the black man. It is doable. And I urge President Buhari to make history by seizing the moment. I'm not impressed so far that the moment has been so seized.
I suppose the big question is, I mean, when you go beyond people like yourself who are obviously politically clued on, and you go beyond the kids who are marching on the streets, I mean, you know, the argument has been made that the rest of the 200 million Nigerians were simply ensconced in their homes watching the proceedings. I mean, how does the rest of Nigeria who aren't protesting on the streets or who aren't politicians feed off the anxiety of the times we're living in and all the angst and passion and dynamism, if you like, that's going on?
Well, you know that it is true that not every Nigerian was on the streets, but a number of the people on the streets were representing the views of various Nigerians. They come from homes. They represent the views of their parents. When we fought for independence, everybody was not on the streets. The nationalist movement was not made up of the whole of Nigeria. When we fought against Gowon's 1976 is unrealistic. Everybody was not on the streets. It was all we, the young ones, and the students who we had the conscience of the nation. At that age, the tabula rasa, the clean slates, the uncontaminated segment of society, and yet the inheritors of the society. So it is in the place of the young to articulate their mood of the nation. And this is what the young people have done. I mean, I'm too old to go into the trenches now. During the war, I was in the trenches. The young people have gone into the trenches and told us, we're not getting it right. It is the responsibility of the leadership to say, let's come together. How do we get it right? If we don't do that, we will allow the dissatisfaction of the young people overcome the necessity to have an ordered examination of our system and the prescription of correct solutions and their implementation in a manner that will get applause from the entire citizen. There is no Nigerian who doesn't feel everything these children are talking about. And the earlier we come together, and this has to be done with some basic dispatch. I mean, this doesn't come for too much cracking of the brain. Every Nigerian knows what the problem is.
I'm not hearing the kind of noises you want to be made. I'm not hearing that from the government. So given that, I mean, obviously what you're saying, a lot of people will agree with you, a lot of others will disagree, but using your considerable imagination and your analytical abilities in the last few seconds that we've got, just reflect for us on what happens next.
Well, as I said, if I was the head of state, I would take a very good look at the issues that have been distilled here. The unworkability of our present political system and the fact that it's been on the front burner of public discourse in Nigeria since the military left governance.
Chief Nnia Nwodo, I'm really sorry to jump in there, but we're out of time. Chief Nnia Nwodo is the president of the pan-cultural organization Ohanaeze Ndigbo. Thank you very much indeed. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye and thank you for watching.